Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This week we've got Chapter 6, and we're going to focus on human rights and the grand challenges. Now, thank you for bearing with me as I get these slides reformatted and new videos put up. The hurricane last semester changed things a bit, so I want to make sure that we've got good slides and good weekly presentations that will be interesting for you this semester. So as usual, we've got our reading review. We're going to go a bit over human rights again. It's also in your textbook, so a chance to review that as well. Then we're going to talk a bit about the International Federation of Social Workers. And the IFSW is a global body for the profession. The Federation and its national members strive for social justice, human rights, and inclusive, sustainable social development through the promotion of social works, best practices, and engagement in international cooperation. And particularly want to share with you what the International Federation has to say, because they are a little bit, in my opinion at least, a little bit more tied into the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights as they are an international body. So from this chapter, the big things that you should be familiar with are human rights, civil rights and civil liberties, what we mean by first generation, second generation, and third generation rights, social work and social justice, the isms. Now we're going over a lot of the isms in more depth in each of the modules, so you should just be familiar with the general definitions. Again, you can kind of skim through this section in the textbook, particularly as the older edition, some of the language is kind of incorrect or not up to date, shall we say. For example, they talk about handicapism instead of ableism. Be familiar with the idea of social Darwinism and where kind of the theories of social injustice come from, and be familiar with the effects of social injustice. So before we go into human rights and social work, I just want to take a little bit of time to talk about human rights on the international level and human rights in the United States. Now, on the international level, this is laid out in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Human rights are supposed to be inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. And they include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, the right to work and education, and many more. And everyone is supposed to be entitled to these rights without discrimination. And these rights are organized into three categories, or three generations. So the first generation of human rights deal essentially with liberty and participation in political life. They are supposed to protect individuals from excesses of the state. So they include rights, among other things, to life, equality before the law, freedom of speech, the right to a fair trial, freedom of religion, and voting rights. And we can see in the United States Bill of Rights, many of these rights are protected. The second generation rights are deal with social and political freedoms, and they include things like the right to be employed in just and favorable conditions, the rights to food, to housing, and to health care, as well as rights to Social Security and unemployment benefits. And around the world today, many nations, states, or groups of nations have developed legally binding declarations guaranteeing these second generation rights. For example, the European Social Charter guarantees many of these second generation rights. Our third generation rights, or collective rights, are a broad category of rights that include things such as the right to self-determination, the right to economic and social development, the right to a healthy environment, the right to natural resources, the right to communicate and communication rights, the rights to participate in cultural heritage, and many others. Now in the U.S. Constitution provides strong protections for our civil and political rights, those first generation rights, but it fails to recognize the economic, social, and cultural rights guaranteed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So again, our second generation rights aren't guaranteed in the United States through law. This is why, for example, we see European countries having things such as universal health care, and we don't. Now, there are programs within the US, such as food stamps, or there may be programs at the state level that provide some of protections or some assistance with these things. But we aren't, as a people, guaranteed rights to housing or guaranteed rights to healthcare, such as those in Europe, so some of those in the European countries enjoy. So since we don't have all of these protections and rights guaranteed in the United States, what does this mean for social work and how we practice? So in the United States, as social workers, we often don't necessarily include the title or the label human rights, but much of our work, the foundation of our profession, our code of ethics, as you saw on the last slide, all tie into human rights as laid out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You know, we can look back at our early history, the early history of the social work profession with our reformers such as Jane Addams, and their ties into human rights and valuing human rights such as advocacy, treating people who are impoverished with dignity, and things like that. And indeed, if we look at our code of ethics today, we have specific language around social justice, respect for the dignity and worth of the person, including respecting rights to self-determination. We also recognize the importance of human relationships. And so even though we may not explicitly use the language of human rights, our code of ethics, the way we practice, are all very much tied into, in particular, the second generation and third generation rights, and providing supports and opportunities for people to have those rights or to have protections from oppression of those rights. Now, the IFSW, which is our International Federation of Social Workers and the global body representing the profession, is a bit more explicit in their discussion of human rights compared to us in the United States. And they say, particularly around human rights, that human rights, the term, condenses into two words: the struggle for dignity and fundamental freedoms, which allow the full development of human potential. Civil and political rights, so those first generation rights, have to be accompanied by economic, social, and cultural rights. So the idea that so many nations have protections around those first generation rights, but to achieve a just society, to achieve the full inclusion of people, we have to have protections for our economic, our social, and cultural, for our second and our third generation rights. So what this means for social work practice, both in the United States and internationally, if we go back to those code of ethics and the values that we have, we recognize the dignity and worth of all people, right? We recognize that every person has a unique value. We recognize that they have a right to self-determination and self-fulfillment. And we also recognize that every person has the right not only to participate in society, and to get benefits from society, but also to give back to society and improve the well-being of society. We also recognize that societies, regardless of its form, so regardless of the country, the state, the form of government, should really function to provide the maximum benefit for all its members. We are truly focused on social justice and all that entails for individuals, for groups, and for societies at large. And we have a responsibility to devote our unique knowledge base, our skills, to work with these individuals, groups, communities, and societies in their development, to help achieve opportunities for protections for these second and third generation rights. So what does this look like for social workers in practice? Well, we deal with common human needs, or if you will, in many ways, attempts to protect human rights, the attempts to protect whether they be first generation, second generation, or third generation rights, particularly of those who are marginalized or belong to groups that are particularly marginalized or oppressed within our society. We assist individuals, groups, and communities in addressing problems, whether it be from individual functioning, such as helping individuals who are dealing with addiction or who are experiencing depression or anxiety, to groups and communities who are trying to access resources, who are trying to develop a better environment, whether it's bringing in businesses, whether it's taking care of pollution in their areas and things like that. We work across levels to address the problems that are really impacting the human rights and the ability to live a healthy and active life of individuals. We try to really improve the quality of life for all people. So again, as I said, we're really focusing across the board from working with individuals to working with communities, and even more broadly at the federal level, helping in the development of policy that's going to protect the rights and interests of all people. And in particular, again, if you saw in our previous discussion, our ethical principles and standards really demand that we show respect for all people, regardless of their previous conduct, regardless of what life experiences they have or how they may be different from us. We're going to talk here in the next section on diversity about how we work with individuals who are different from us, how we use cultural humility in particular in order to provide space to really allow our clients, the individuals that we work with, to have a voice. We recognize that they are the experts in their own lives and their own culture, and we seek to learn from them and to develop a collaborative relationship in order to address these community problems, to address these individual problems. But to do that, we really have to show and really have to truly believe in the dignity and worth of all people. So again, you can see the human rights that we talked about above are really entwined and part of our ethical principles and standards as social workers in the United States. We're just not as explicit about using the terminology of human rights, but it is fundamental to how we practice. It is fundamental to how we work with it at any level of practice, whether it be individuals, groups, communities, or our society more broadly. In addition to promoting and protecting human rights in our day-to-day practice with individuals, families, groups, and communities, we're also involved in kind of a bigger scale or larger picture push to promote human rights, at least for social workers in the United States. And one of the ways that we're doing this is through our grand challenges. So if you recall the video from really your first module on the grand challenges, there are 12 of them. And this is to ensure healthy development for all youth, close the health gap, stop family violence, advance long and productive lives, eradicate social isolation, end homelessness, create social responses to a changing environment, harness technology for social good, promote smart decarceration, reduce extreme economic inequality, build financial capability for all, and achieve equal opportunity and justice. So if you look at these 12, in some ways they really relate to the various human rights that we discussed earlier in this section. There are different ways of looking at it, or approaches to dealing with issues within each of those different generations. And so for the remainder of this class, or what I'm going to have you do in the next section, is actually pick one of the grand challenges that you are particularly interested in. This could be one that you're interested in doing around your call to action project, or it could just be one that you want to explore in more depth. So you're going to choose one of the grand challenges and read the brief description. The PDFs for each of these are on Canvas. And reflect on how this particular topic, this particular grand challenge, relates to the promotion of human rights. So thinking about it in terms of whether it's promoting first generation, second generation, or third generation human rights. And as a bonus, you can use the brief description or the accompanying articles as scholarly resources for your call to action project. So the brief descriptions are just that. They're a very brief description of what that particular grand challenge is about. Each of the grand challenges has at least one and often more articles written about it, how it came to be selected, the different facets that make it up. And you can explore these if you just put in social work grand challenges into Google. The website will pop up, and you can, if you want to explore some of these in more depth, or you want to use more of the material for your call to action project, you can access them that way. So again, for the remainder of the class, you're just going to explore a grand challenge that's of particular interest in more depth. And just as a reminder, as you're working through this class and the rest of the module, that your milestone 2 is due March 3rd. If you're having trouble finding resources or you're struggling to complete this milestone, please reach out to me so that we can talk and we can get you on track to finish this project up and complete this class successfully. And as usual, if you have any questions or concerns, please email me.